Somewhere between the glitter of studio lights and the shadows just beyond the camera frame, a quiet rule governs the world of entertainment. Appearance is never a minor detail. Under the harsh glare of the spotlight, the body is no longer just flesh and bone, it becomes a living resume. Every soft line, every wrinkle, every extra pound is exposed, judged, and silently recorded. There are men who step out at 50, 60 years old, looking as if they were carved out of stone. Their muscles define their smiles, polish their faces, seemingly untouched by time. But behind those immaculate exteriors, it was said that there are medical reports, operating room scars, and decisions made with the full knowledge that one misstep on the table could cost them their lives. Some are believed to take the knife to freeze themselves at a perpetual 20. Others, pushed by a fame that never sleeps, chase a body that can keep up with their legend. Different motives, same battlefield. The surgeries that follow can sometimes light up their careers like a rebirth. Other times they unlock chains of tragedy that drag on for decades, complications, addictions, public ridicule. And in the most extreme cases, the result is a face or physique so altered that longtime fans look twice, struggling to recognize the idol they once knew. The 9 stories you're about to walk through are not intended as verdicts or moral judgments. They are case files from the dark side of success, where appearance turns into a life-or-death negotiation, where men who already have it all step onto an operating table because the mirror whispers that it's still not enough. 9. Al Roker, the TV icon, who reshaped his life with gastric bypass and the removal of an invisible burden. For millions of Americans, Al Roker is the familiar presence who has stood in front of the weather map on the Today Show. For decades, a steady smile, a warm laugh, a voice that feels like morning itself. His career looks unshakable, his energy dependable. But according to Al's own accounts, for years, that cheerful figure was encased in what he once described as a suit of armor made of fat. By his early 40s, reports say, Al Roker's weight had climbed past 330 pounds. Every step became an effort. Just walking from the studio hallway to the set allegedly felt like pushing through water with sandbags on his ankles. Off-camera, even simple breaths sometimes came out labored, underscored by a quiet fear he didn't show on air. The pressure didn't come only from the mirror. In his medical charts, looming diagnoses hovered like storm warnings. Heart disease, diabetes, shortened life expectancy. On March 15, 2002, after wrestling with the decision, Al Roker checked into a hospital for gastric bypass surgery. It was not some impulsive vanity project. It was a calculated risk. According to interviews he later gave, he walked into that operating room carrying not just his own fears, but a promise he said he had made to his father before the older man died, a promise to take his health seriously, to be around longer, to live more responsibly. The surgery itself was recorded as a success. But when Al woke up, he'd entered a new kind of warfare. The weight began to fall off with startling speed. In roughly a year, over 100 pounds dropped away. The public saw a dramatic transformation and applauded. Yet inside that shrinking body, nothing felt simple. Eating, once a source of comfort and a coping mechanism for stress, became an exact equation. Spoons measured in careful fractions, bites taken slowly and deliberately. If he ate the wrong thing or too fast, his body revolted. His energy spiked and crashed unpredictably as he learned the rules of his reconstructed stomach. According to his later accounts, he was constantly walking a tightrope between nourishment and nausea, balancing vitamin supplements and doctor visits to keep himself upright. And then there was the aftermath that viewers couldn't see beneath his tailored suits: the excess skin. With the fat gone, loose folds of skin sagged from his belly, chest, and arms hanging like the remnants of a life he was trying to leave behind. They chafed when he moved, irritated his skin, and served as a daily physical reminder of how far he'd let things go. On April 20, 2003, Al reportedly underwent another major procedure, this time not to save his life directly, but to reclaim his comfort. Surgeons removed about 11 pounds of surplus skin. It wasn't just cosmetic tidying, it was a necessary cleanup operation after a rapid, violent shift in body composition. The cuts and stitches weren't about vanity as much as they were about being able to walk, bend, and live without constant physical interference from his own past. After that, the man viewers saw on television seemed lighter in every way, slimmer, more agile, more in sync with the image expected of a TV personality. But the transformation locked him into a different kind of discipline. Food could no longer be impulsive. Each meal became a small negotiation with his new anatomy. Exercise was no longer optional. It was a daily contract he had to honor, or risk slipping backwards. There were periods when the familiar pressures of live television travel and stress wrestled him back toward old habits. Reports indicate that at one point his weight crept up by around 40 pounds, a jarring reminder that surgery wasn't a magic fix, but merely the beginning of a lifelong battle. It was said that this rebound scared him more than the initial operation did. If he let up, his own body could betray him again. Even as he entered his 70s, Roker still appeared on screen, with a comparatively stable weight and renewed mobility. His health, by most accounts, improved significantly from his heaviest years. But the scars from those operating rooms never disappeared, not on his skin, and not in his medical history. On November 18, 2022, he was hospitalized for a serious health issue related to blood clots and internal complications, a stark reminder that a body dramatically altered by medical intervention is always negotiating with risk. These days, when Roker speaks publicly about his journey, he rarely frames it as a glamorous success story. Instead, he describes it as a cautionary tale about what it truly means to alter the body with such drastic methods, the courage required to lie down on the table, the grueling months of recovery, the unexpected side effects, and the lifelong discipline needed to maintain what the scalpel began. His smiling face on morning television may look effortless, but behind that smile is a man who has walked through a storm. Most viewers will never fully see a man who learned that changing your exterior can save your life, but will also demand a price in vigilance, vulnerability, and an ongoing war against the self. 8. Randy Jackson, the music power broker who forced diabetes to surrender with a knife to the stomach. Randy Jackson has long been known as the man behind the glass producer-musician and the unshakable judge's chair on American Idol. While contestants trembled under his casual yo dog, he sat there as a symbol of stability in an industry built on pressure. But behind that steady presence, according to his own later accounts, there was a body quietly collapsing under the weight of success. By his late 40s, Randy's frame had swelled past 350 pounds. Long studio days, late-night sessions, endless flights, and catering tables became the backdrop of his life. Food was everywhere and time was nowhere. The exhaustion that washed over him wasn't just about work, it came from simply existing inside that body. He began to notice how quickly he ran out of breath, not on stage, but just walking from one room to another, just sitting still. Then came the verdict that stripped away any illusion this was only about looks: type 2 diabetes. For a man with a family history of obesity-related illness, the diagnosis hit like a siren. According to interviews he later gave, every meal suddenly turned into a negotiation with fear. The things he had once eaten on autopilot now felt like loaded dice. And yet the treadmill of his career did not slow down. Studio, plane, hotel, set, repeat. Fast food between meetings, late dinners after tapings, eating just to keep moving. His weight continued to rise even as his health readings slid deeper into danger. On June 12, 2003, after trying and failing with diets, pills, and half measures, Randy Jackson made a decision that would redraw the map of his life. He went in for gastric bypass surgery, a procedure that would physically reduce his stomach and force his body into a new relationship with food. It was not by any honest measure an easy fix. It was a last resort. When he woke up, the world was the same, but every rule inside his body had changed. In the first months after surgery, eating became an exercise in strict control. Tiny spoonfuls, careful chewing. Anything more in his system rebelled with nausea, dizziness, or pain. The body that once absorbed huge meals without a second thought now punished the smallest miscalculation. He spoke later about the way fatigue stalked him in those early weeks, how vitamin deficiencies, low energy, and wild shifts in blood sugar became constant shadows. Doctors had him on a tight leash, meticulously balanced nutrition, micronutrient supplements, and regular blood tests to keep him from drifting into a new crisis created by the cure itself. Exercise, once something he could ignore, re-entered his life, not as an optional hobby, but as a slow, cautious ritual. He started with simple walks, measured steps, as if moving across thin ice. The results, however, were undeniable. Over the next 18 months, more than 115 pounds slipped away. The scale dropped, his clothes hung differently, his reflection sharpened into a version of himself he hadn't seen in decades. But the weight loss didn't come clean. With the fat gone, sagging skin clung to his arms, chest, and stomach, a visible reminder of how extreme the transformation had been. Unlike others who chose further surgery to cut away the excess, Randy reportedly decided to fight that battle in the gym. He leaned into strength training, trying to harden and fill what had been left behind. As time passed, his health markers told a story even more important than the mirror. His diabetic indicators began to stabilize. Risk levels, once spiraling out of control, pulled back toward a safer zone. The changes held. Through the chaos of television seasons and touring schedules, he managed to keep his new weight within range for nearly 2 decades. No small feat for someone who had spent so long in a whirlwind of stress and temptation. That did not mean the journey was smooth. There were periods when work pressure surged and old habits crept in. His weight sometimes jumped by 20 pounds or more, like a warning flare telling him how quickly everything could unravel if he let his guard down. But this time he understood that every regained pound came with a price his body could no longer afford to pay. In his 60s, Randy Jackson began speaking more openly about what he'd been through. It was said that his obsession with understanding his own body after surgery led him to focus heavily on gut health. He eventually helped launch a company built around digestive and metabolic support, a business decision born not just from market logic, but from the months he'd spent wrestling with nutritional deficiencies, blood sugar spikes, and the constant threat of relapse. His story spread quietly at first, then more widely becoming a point of reference for other celebrities grappling with weight, chronic illness, and the fear of losing control over their own image. When people looked at Randy on television, they still saw the producer, the judge, the music insider. But layered beneath that was something else, a survivor of the knife, someone who had stared directly at the limits of his body and chosen an extreme, irreversible path, rather than let disease decide the ending for him. Looking back, gastric bypass did more than shrink his frame. It rewired his entire life philosophy. Each lost pound carried its own history of sweat, anxiety, and self-discipline. Every meal became a choice with consequences. And every time he returned to that judge's chair, a little lighter, a little stronger, he carried with him the knowledge that fame and money could not buy what the knife had given him, a second chance paid for in pain and relentless vigilance. 7. Smokey Robinson, the Motown legend, who tried to turn back time with a lifted face and frozen lines. Smokey Robinson's voice is woven into the fabric of American music. His songs helped define the Motown sound, his falsetto carried across generations, and for decades he stepped on stage as if age itself had agreed to move in slow motion around him. But as he moved into his 60s, it was said that the stage lights began to betray what the music did not, the delicate map of time engraved across his face. Under the harsh beams, every line around his eyes, every crease along the corners of his mouth appeared sharper, deeper. Those etchings didn't show up in the records people played at home, but on television and in concert close-ups, they suddenly felt loud. At the same time, a new wave of younger artists, with smooth, unmarked faces, was rising. Comparisons, according to people close to him, followed Smokey like a cold draft through backstage corridors. He reportedly began to feel a strange disconnect. His music still sounded young, but his reflection looked older than the melodies he sang. The desire to reconcile those two images, to make his face match the timelessness of his voice, quietly hardened into resolve. On April 10, 2005, Smokey Robinson is believed to have taken a step he once might have dismissed. He agreed to a full-scale cosmetic intervention. The procedure, according to later descriptions, was not minor. Surgeons performed a facelift, pulling the skin upward and back from incisions hidden near and behind the ears. At the same time, fillers were injected into parts of his cheeks to restore a fuller, more youthful contour, and Botox was used to flatten deep wrinkles on his forehead lines, said to be as pronounced as 3 millimeters under bright light. It was a methodical restructuring, each small adjustment carefully calculated to shave years off his appearance. The days afterward were far from glamorous. Smokey's face reportedly swelled, feeling unnaturally tight, as if someone had wrapped his skin a size too small. He had to step away from the stage-cancel appearances and retreat from the public eye. Rest, which he had once used to recharge for performances, turned into a slow, anxious waiting game in front of the mirror. As the swelling subsided, a new face gradually emerged. The deep creases softened, the skin looked smoother, the jawline tighter. When Smokey finally returned to the spotlight, audiences saw a version of him that seemed to have been pulled back in time by more than a decade. Wrinkles that had been part of his expression were suddenly faint or gone altogether. To many he looked refreshed, almost startlingly youthful. But the murmur started quickly. Some viewers whispered that his face now looked stiffer, that certain expressions seemed less fluid, as if the muscles were relearning how to move. Smokey, by most accounts, tried not to engage with the speculation, but his behavior suggested he took it seriously. He reportedly doubled down on skincare routines, spa treatments, massages, and periodic maintenance injections to help his features settle into something that felt both smooth and expressive. Through it all, one thing did not change: his voice. On stage, Smokey Robinson continued to sing with the same airy tenderness that had made him a legend. By the time he reached 80, he was still performing, still touring, still facing down the same lights that had once made him acutely aware of his age. For some, the surgeries seemed like a necessary reinforcement, a way to keep his outward appearance from contradicting the music that refused to grow old. Speculation remains about how much of his long career extension can be credited to those cosmetic interventions. But what is clear is this: in an industry that welds image and sound together, Smokey Robinson chose to confront time with scalpels and syringes, rather than simply stepping back. The result was a face that allowed him to stand on stage a little longer, a little stronger, in a world where growing visibly old can sometimes mean being quietly pushed aside. 8. Harry Belafonte, the folk icon who lifted his eyelids to keep his gaze eternal. Harry Belafonte was more than a singer. He was a cultural landmark. His calypso hits, his acting, and his unflinching activism made him a figure whose presence carried the weight of history. For decades he stood before crowds not only as an entertainer, but as a voice of conscience. Yet even for someone of his stature, the passage of time did not negotiate. As he entered his 60s, it was reported that he began to feel the physical consequences of aging in an unexpectedly direct way through his eyes. The skin around his eyelids gradually sagged, drooping downward, obscuring parts of his vision. Under stage lights, what once was a sharp, alert gaze began to look heavy, as if fatigue had settled permanently around his eyes. For a man whose work depended on his ability to connect face-to-face with audiences and activists, this was more than cosmetic. It was functional. Harsh lighting at events and on television broadcasts emphasized the droop, making him appear more tired than he actually felt. According to people close to him, Harry understood that his appearance was not about vanity. It was an instrument. A bright, focused gaze was part of how he communicated urgency and conviction. If his eyes looked dim, his message risked losing some of its force. On March 5, 1995, Harry Belafonte reportedly made a decision that surprised some of his peers. He went in for blepharoplasty eyelid surgery combined with targeted facial fillers. The operation was relatively concise but precise. Surgeons made small incisions along the natural folds of his eyelids, removing the excess skin that had hung over his lashes and weighed down his stare. At the same time, they used fillers to add slight volume to areas of his face that had hollowed with age, aiming not to change his features, but to restore them. Even a small facial procedure, however, comes with a price. The area around his eyes swelled and became intensely sensitive. Harry had to retreat from public appearances for months, forced into a kind of enforced stillness that contrasted sharply with his usual schedule of speeches, concerts, and meetings. During that time, according to reports, he adhered to strict instructions, limited movement, minimal strain on his eyes, and long stretches of quiet days that likely felt foreign to a man used to action. Gradually, the swelling faded. When he faced the mirror, the change was clear but not grotesque. His eyes appeared more open, his gaze once again bright and penetrating. The heaviness that had once made his expression look fatigued was gone. His face looked fresher, not in a radically altered way, but in the subtle sense that a weight had been lifted. When Harry Belafonte returned to public life, his presence carried the same moral authority as before, but now his eyes matched the fire in his words. He continued to attend rallies, speak at events, and appear on camera well into his later years, the rejuvenated gaze helping him maintain both his physical capacity and symbolic power. For his generation of artists and activists, undergoing such a procedure was rare and to some controversial. But in hindsight, it was said that the surgery allowed him to keep working at an extraordinary pace, preserving not just his image, but his ability to see clearly, read a room, and look people directly in the eyes as he asked them to confront uncomfortable truths. 9. Jermaine Jackson, the Jackson brother, who rebuilt his face to keep standing in a family of mirrors. Jermaine Jackson grew up under a level of scrutiny few can imagine. As a key member of the Jackson 5, and later a solo artist, he shared stages, cameras, and headlines with a brother who would become one of the most dissected figures in modern pop culture. Inside that pressure cooker, every feature, nose, hairline, skin texture was silently compared, measured, evaluated. By the mid-1980 AA, according to long-circulated accounts, Jermaine felt the full weight of that comparison culture. The spotlight not only captured his performances, it froze his face in time, allowing fans and critics to zoom in on every perceived imperfection. Under that constant gaze, the distance between how he appeared and how he wanted to appear widened into a chasm. On July 12, 1985, Jermaine Jackson is believed to have taken his first decisive step into the world of cosmetic alteration. The target was his nose. Surgeons reportedly performed a rhinoplasty designed to narrow his nostrils by roughly 20%, a subtle modification on paper, but meaningful on camera. Afterward, the bridge appeared slimmer, the tip more defined. The change gave his face a slightly more refined balance, and for a while it seemed enough. But in an image-obsessed industry, enough rarely stays that way. As the years passed, age began to leave its stamp, deepening forehead lines, a receding hairline, fatigue creeping in around the eyes. Coupled with the relentless pace of the music business, those signs of time started to feel in Jermaine's eyes like threats to his relevance. On September 8, 2008, he reportedly chose a more comprehensive approach. No longer content with a single correction, Jermaine opted for a combination of interventions. Botox was injected into his forehead to soften wrinkles that had etched themselves as deeply as 2 millimeters into his skin. Fillers were placed in key areas to plump and round his face, warding off the gauntness that bright lights can exaggerate. Perhaps the most dramatic change, however, involved his hairline. Using a meticulous scalp pigmentation technique, technicians tattooed more than 50 tiny ink points into his skin, constructing the illusion of a fuller hairline, extended roughly 3 centimeters forward. Under stage lights, the effect was striking a sharper frame around his face, a denser crown that visually pushed back the years. The aftermath was not as clean as the before and after photos might suggest. In the first days and weeks, Jermaine reportedly endured persistent pain, a tight, stinging scalp, a dull ache in his forehead, and the constant awareness of raw healing skin. Painkillers, regular checkups, and strict care routines became part of his life, along with the ever-present risk that infection or poor healing could distort the very features he was trying to protect. When the healing process finally settled, the results sparked divided reactions. Some observers felt his new look appeared too constructed, too polished, like a mask placed over the man they remembered. Others argued that he looked undeniably younger, with thicker-looking hair and smoother skin that allowed him to step on stage in his 70s with a confidence he might otherwise have lacked. Whatever the opinions, one fact remained: Jermaine Jackson's string of aesthetic procedures was less about chasing vanity than it was about clawing back control in a family and an industry where appearance had never been a neutral detail. Each appointment, each needle, each new line drawn on his face was part of a private rebellion against invisibility, a declaration that he intended to remain present in the story, not fade quietly into the background. 4. Lionel Richie, the sweet-voiced hitmaker who quietly edited his face to keep his smile ageless. Lionel Richie's career has been built on intimacy. His voice carries confession, tenderness, and longing in a way that pulls people in close, whether he's singing to a stadium or a single camera lens. For decades, his face, open, expressive, emotional, served as the visual counterpart to that voice. But the longer he stayed under the lights, the more brutally those lights documented every passing year. As he moved through his 60s, it was said that Lionel began to notice a troubling shift. His eyelids, once wide and expressive, drooped just enough to change how his emotions read from a distance. In concert footage and televised performances, his eyes seemed narrower, more tired. At the same time, horizontal lines carved into his forehead and deep laugh lines, once charming, became trenches that pulled his features downward. On massive stages where high-definition cameras broadcast every micro-expression, this wasn't just a cosmetic concern. It threatened the very connection his performances relied on. The songs hadn't lost their power, but his face, under unforgiving angles, no longer reflected the youthful openness that fans associated with those timeless ballads. On October 15, 2012, Lionel Richie reportedly chose a path he had long avoided discussing publicly. He underwent a set of quiet cosmetic procedures designed less to reinvent his face than to gently rewind it. The cornerstone was eyelid surgery, small, precise laser cuts used to remove approximately 2 millimeters of drooping upper lid skin. On paper, it sounded minimal. Under stage lights, that small adjustment meant eyes that appeared significantly more alert. The work didn't stop there. Botox was introduced strategically to soften deep forehead wrinkles and temper the visibility of frown lines without freezing his expression completely. Laugh lines running as deep as roughly 1.5 centimeters were treated just enough to soften their edges, while preserving the emotional warmth fans recognized. Fillers were added in carefully chosen spots to smooth subtle sagging and maintain volume where age had begun to hollow his features. Recovery was a private struggle shielded from the fans' view. Lionel reportedly cleared his schedule for 3 months, canceling or postponing performances. In those early days, the skin around his eyes felt tight and tender. Every glance in the mirror turned into a balancing act, studying whether the adjustments looked natural or whether he had crossed into a realm where familiarity might be lost. Throughout this period, he publicly dismissed speculation about surgery, pointing instead to healthy living and positivity. Meanwhile, observers watched and argued. When he finally reappeared in the spotlight, the difference was undeniable. His eyes opened wider, his gaze brighter, his face smoother. The man singing Hello and Endless Love to sold-out crowds somehow looked as if he had stepped back in time without becoming unrecognizable. To some, the transformation bordered on uncanny. To others, it felt like a respectful tune-up and edit, carefully mixed into the track of his appearance, so that the emotional performance stayed on key. Whatever the truth behind the exact procedures, Lionel Richie emerged on the other side with a face that allowed him to keep delivering the same songs, now backed by a visage that matched their enduring, almost ageless resonance. In his 70s, he continues to fill arenas, his energy intact, his features strangely resistant to erosion. It is, according to those who study such things, the result of a delicate collaboration between medical science and relentless self-discipline, an attempt to protect not just his image, but the emotional clarity of every note he sings. 3. Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson, the action titan who carved his chest into a superhero emblem. Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson built his legend with his body long before he ever stepped in front of a movie camera. In the wrestling ring, bulk and power were currency. But when he crossed over into Hollywood, the expectations shifted. The camera demanded not just size but symmetry, not just strength, but a particular visual ideal, every muscle sculpted, every line clean. Behind the scenes, it was said that a stubborn issue followed him from his wrestling days into his acting career. Years of intense training and hormonal fluctuations, reportedly including steroid use, earlier in his athletic life left him with excess tissue in his chest area, a condition that created a softer, irregular shape beneath his pectoral muscles. Under loose ring gear, it could be ignored. On a giant movie screen, it became an unwanted focal point. As he transitioned into action films, where shirtless scenes and close-up shots of his body were no longer occasional but expected, that irregularity turned into a liability. For someone whose brand revolved around an almost mythic physicality, the idea of a flaw in his superhero frame was more than an annoyance. It was a threat to the image he was building. On May 22, 2005, Dwayne Johnson reportedly chose to confront the problem head-on. He underwent a surgery that combined liposuction with the removal of excess glandular tissue in his chest, a procedure aimed not at reducing size overall, but at reshaping. Surgeons used discreet incisions hidden in the natural folds and under the arms, drawing out roughly 2 liters of fat, while cutting away the stubborn tissue that refused to respond to diet and training. The operation lasted hours. When he emerged, his chest was swollen, tightly bound, and far from camera-ready. For a man whose life revolved around brutal workouts and constant motion, the next 15 weeks were a kind of enforced captivity. He had to halt heavy lifting, abandon high-impact routines, and accept that his muscles would temporarily soften while his body healed. Mirror time became an exercise in patience. The lines he was used to seeing, hard-earned pectoral striations, sharp separation between chest and shoulders, blurred under bandages and bruising. Mentally, it was said to be one of the hardest stretches of his career. In exchange for a future perfect frame, he had to endure a present in which he felt weaker, smaller, and frighteningly out of control. When he was finally cleared to return to the gym, Dwayne Johnson started over, rebuilding his chest from a new foundation. Light movements, high focus, incremental increases. Under gym lighting, the reflection slowly changed, the swelling receded, revealing a flatter, more uniform chest contour. The overdeveloped, uneven shape that had once haunted him gave way to a solid, balanced structure. The transformation showed its full power on screen. In franchises like Fast and Furious and other high-profile action films, he appeared with his shirt open or off entirely, the camera lingering on a chest that now matched his myth, broad rock, solid and symmetrically carved. Fans saw the result and applauded. Most never learned how much of that perfection had been negotiated under surgical lights. Dwayne Johnson has rarely gone into deep detail about the operation, preferring to let his training regimen and discipline take center stage. But for those who know the story, the 2005 surgery stands as a turning point. It was not just a tweak for vanity, but a calculated move in a larger strategy to shed the last traces of his wrestling past and emerge as a global action archetype whose body could fill any screen on earth. 2. Kanye West, the music visionary whose pursuit of a slimmer body opened the door to a different kind of nightmare. Kanye West, also known as Ye, has built a legacy on breaking rules in music, fashion, and public persona. But for all his outward defiance, it was said that he was never immune to one of the industry's oldest pressures, the body under the clothes. As he juggled tours, studio marathons, public controversies, and an exhausting schedule of appearances, his weight became a recurring topic in tabloids and online chatter. Comments about his size, his changing frame, and unflattering photos taken at bad angles circulated widely. For someone with an intense need to control how he is perceived, this was more than white noise. According to his later admissions, the ridicule and fixation on his body cut deeply, breeding an obsession with regaining control of his image, this time from the neck down. On April 25, 2016, Kanye West reportedly made a drastic move. He underwent extensive liposuction, not just in one area but across key regions of his body: waist, hips, abdomen. Surgeons used laser-assisted techniques to melt fat before suction, reducing the risk of uneven lumps and carving more defined contours. It was said that around 4 liters of fat were removed in a single session, a number that startled many when it eventually surfaced. Abdominal sculpting helped etch the faint outlines of a six-pack into his midsection. But while the exterior was being reshaped, the interior was thrown into chaos. Recovery from such a large-scale procedure was brutal. Pain radiated across his torso. Exhaustion set in. Sleep became elusive as discomfort gnawed at him. To cope, he was prescribed opioid painkillers, medications intended to carry him through the worst of the post-surgical agony. At first, they seemed like a necessary relief. Then, according to Kanye's later public statements, they became something else: a quiet trap. His body and mind adapted quickly, growing reliant on the chemical numbness to offset pain and help him rest. Insomnia, paranoia, and emotional volatility crept in, fed by the very drugs meant to make healing easier. By November 21, 2016, the situation had spiraled. Kanye West was hospitalized amid reports of extreme exhaustion and mental distress. It was widely believed that his dependence on painkillers following the surgery had played a major role in the breakdown, a direct line from cosmetic intervention to psychological crisis. When he resurfaced, his exterior bore the imprint of the operation. His waist appeared slimmer, his frame more streamlined. Clothes fit closer to his body, reinforcing a silhouette that lined up more closely with the hyper-controlled aesthetic he was known for in his fashion work. But behind that sharper outline lay the memory of hospital rooms, IV drips, and a mind pushed to its limits. In the years that followed, Kanye spoke openly about that 2016 liposuction as a warning. He claimed that the pressure he felt to look a certain way to avoid being mocked for gaining weight had pushed him onto a path that led directly to opioid dependence. Without that pressure, he suggested, he might never have submitted to the knife at all. His story stands as one of the most unsettling examples of what can happen when appearance becomes a non-negotiable condition for staying in the public eye. A procedure designed to refine his body ended up fracturing his stability. The cost of a slimmer waistline was not measured only in dollars or recovery time, but in the cracks left in his mental health. 1. Michael Jackson, the pop king, who rewrote his face until it became a mask the world could not look away from. Michael Jackson's rise from child prodigy to global icon is a story almost everyone knows. His voice, his choreography, his videos all became benchmarks for what pop music could be. But there is another narrative that unfolded in parallel, one more disturbing and harder to watch: the slow, relentless transformation of his face. From the earliest days of the Jackson 5, Michael lived under surveillance. Cameras caught his growth, his acne, his adolescent awkwardness, broadcasting every change across the world. As he entered his teens, the boyish roundness that had once charmed audiences began to feel in his own mind like a prison. A reported nose injury during intense dance rehearsals only heightened his dissatisfaction. On June 1, 1979, Michael Jackson is believed to have taken his first major step toward altering his appearance. He underwent rhinoplasty to narrow the bridge of his nose and refine its overall shape. The result was subtle but significant: a slimmer, more sculpted nose that seemed to align with the emerging adult image he wanted to project. For a moment, it looked like a small, controlled adjustment. But it did not end there. As his fame exploded with albums like Thriller and Bad, the pressure multiplied. His face became as iconic as his music, and every new video, every award show, every magazine cover magnified any perceived flaw. Over the years, Michael reportedly went back under the knife again and again, additional rhinoplasties, small corrections that accumulated over time. Each procedure made tiny alterations, thinning the bridge, sharpening the tip, refining the nostrils. According to various accounts, the number of nose surgeries eventually climbed into the double digits. With each pass of the scalpel, the structure of his nose grew more fragile, like glass thinned to the edge of fracture. Complications began to surface: breathing difficulties, infections, and the constant need for reconstructive tweaks to repair damage caused by previous operations. In August 1986, another major change arrived.